He is a mean, he's a racist, and he's very, very, very devilish.
Oh, Bashir. Oh, that guy is a rat.
When Michael Jackson was betrayed by both the corporate media and his own industry elites at the same time, it unleashed a beast inside him that was about to raze it all to the ground.
I don't think people understand how big Michael Jackson was.
Sony Records said, oh, no way. We can't let a own half of this, even if he's the #1 selling artist of all time.
But since Michael Jackson's life is a story of revenge and redemption cut short, I think it's time we complete the arc and end that story the way he deserved. Subscribe to Elites Exposed for more, and watch how it all started when Michael declared war on Sony Music.
Throughout the years, black artists have been taken advantage of completely. And it's time now that we have to put a stop to this incredible injustice. These artists are always on tour because if they stopped touring, they would totally go broken. And it's been, the record companies really do conspire against their artists. They steal, they cheat, they do whatever they can, especially the black artists. Sony Tommy Mattola. Tommy Mattola is the president of the record division. He is a mean, he's a racist, and he's very, very, very devilish.
And if you know anything about just how enslaved most artists are in predatory record label contracts, you realize that Michael Jackson was the only artist big enough to name and shame the CEO of Sony Music like this. It started when Michael shelled out over $30 million in 2001 to drop the most expensive studio album he has ever done, and that was Invincible. Because despite selling over 10 million copies, it was hardly able to break even against its gargantuan total budget of over $70 million, including promotions. It would be a career-defining success for any other artist, but this is Michael Jackson we're talking about. And Michael immediately suspected that Sony Music had deliberately stalled mass promotions of the album far earlier, just to get Michael in debt to the record label by invoking contract clauses, and then using that leverage to buy off the massive music catalog he co-owned with Sony.
Okay, what is your greatest lesson learned?
Not to trust everybody. Not to trust anybody in the industry. There's a lot of sharks, and record companies steal, they cheat, you have to audit them, and it's time for artists to take a stand against them.
So why would Sony sabotage their own artist's album? Well, if you know how record contracts work, you'd understand how a failed album almost always gets the artist into debt, much more than the studio that backed it. And Michael alleged that if Sony could do that, they'd have a lot more leverage over him to buy off the 50% of Sony ATV's music catalog rights that he owned.
Do you know Michael Jackson owned 50% of Sony Records? Michael Jackson owned the Beatles catalog, which made him 50% owner of Sony Records. Sony Records said, oh, no way. We can't let a own half of this, even if he's the #1 selling artist of all time. So Michael Jackson's album Invincible comes out, and what does Sony do? They give him no promotion. They sabotage Invincible to make sure Michael Jackson goes into debt, and then they come back to Michael and say, you're in debt, Michael, you owe us a couple mil, give us the Beatles music. Michael says, no, I'm gonna have a concert, raise the money to pay y'all off. You're never getting the catalog.
But remember, he was doing this while still signed to Sony and practically having as much sway over the company as its top executives. And like you can't have two kings on a throne, Sony had realized that in a fight with Michael, only one of them would eventually survive. And what I find crazier now in hindsight is what a high-risk, high-reward gamble this must have been for Michael. He was trying to assert his independence against his own music label, who had the power to make his albums fail and destroy his bargaining power. Or in other words, he was trying to escape the belly of the beast by tearing right out of it. But he sank further back down into the abyss every time he slipped. But Michael had one thing that the labels didn't. Once the fight was on, he went to his legion of fans and made sure his side of the story would become engraved in history.
We can't let them get away with what they're trying to do because now I'm a free agent. So I'm leaving Sony a free agent, owning half of Sony. So I own half of Sony's publishing, and
And I'm leaving them, and they're very angry at me because of it. I just did good business, you know.
Tell him!
Say it, Michael!
Tell the story!
But, so, the way they get revenge is to try and destroy my album.
But the truth is, Michael Jackson had just become the biggest in a long list of names already calling out exploitative record label deals and predatory contracts in the music business. That list included artists like Prince, Tupac, George Michael, and Courtney Love. Except Michael was far too big and had far too much power to fight back than these old guards of the industry were used to.
I don't think people understand how big Michael Jackson was. I don't think they understand it because they weren't alive when it was happening.
Yeah, it's hard to convict. When you talk to young people now, you're like, there'll never be anyone that big, and they're like, yeah, but Taylor Swift, but Beyonce.
No,
is like, no,
they're all huge. They're huge, but they're huge today. They're huge today in the era of social media.
He was huge from the time he was like 5 years old until the day he died. He could literally have people passing out in Japan.
Falling up, they couldn't stand being near him. They'd freak out.
Yeah, that's why it's like the world is just set up differently where there could not be another Michael Jackson.
But there's another side to this. Michael Jackson was such a beloved generational artist that one strike would never be enough to bring down his stardom. So the powers that be eventually brought a triple strike against him in the span of a few short years. First was the underperformance of his latest album that landed him in debt to the same people he was trying to fight. Then it was Michael going to war against Sony and making accusations of career sabotage. And lastly, and perhaps most damningly for him, it was the documentary called Living with Michael Jackson that revived old abuse allegations against him from a decade earlier. And if you ask me, this is the point when Michael Jackson found himself standing against the corrupt establishments of two massive industries at the same time: the music industry and the corporate media. And when I think about it, I'm reminded of when Mel Gibson was talking around the same time about the unspoken social contract in the entertainment business. The fact that it will be your own peers who throw you under the bus and sell you out for money.
The social contract. You can't get mad. You can't get mad. You can't let it get you, because you have to make a deal with everyone else, and it's almost unspoken that you are going to be f***ed over at some point by people who you may have done something nice for.
And that's the realization Michael had just had. For example, the documentary Living with Michael Jackson was set up with British journalist Martin Bashir spending 8 whole months gaining access to Michael's most intimate lifestyle and earning his trust to get access to the deepest corners of his world. Michael believed the documentary would help rebuild his image, but then it boiled over into a massive public feud when he accused Martin of deceptively editing and sensationalizing the documentary into a hit piece. He remarked, "Today I feel more betrayed than perhaps ever before. That someone who had got to know my children, my staff, and me, whom I let into my heart and told the truth, could then sacrifice the trust I placed in him and produce this terrible and unfair program."
Oh, Bashir. Oh, I didn't know who you meant. Oh, that guy is a rat. Totally deceived all of us. He breached every contract law. He's not a nice man.
And while I can't tell you whether Martin Bashir is guilty, it's true that he's had friction with people all the way from Princess Diana and Michael Jackson to a father who lost his sons in an attack. So maybe 3 times is a pattern, and that's why even the BBC had to apologize on his behalf at one point. I mean, imagine how soulless you'd have to be to see someone at their most vulnerable and then use that against them on camera for a petty documentary. And it ended up becoming the worst thing that happened to Michael Jackson that year, with renewed investigations and arrests made against him. And that even included a moment where he alleged being handcuffed to the point of physical pain just so law enforcement agencies could collect his fingerprints and photographs.
They were supposed to go in and just check fingerprints and do the whole thing that they do when they take somebody in. They manhandled me very roughly. My shoulder is dislocated literally. is hurting me very badly. I'm in pain all the time. See this arm? This is as far as I can reach it. Same with this side over here.
And that's the thing about a trial by the media. You're guilty until you're proven innocent, and the process itself is the punishment. The optics of Michael Jackson in handcuffs, the edited sound bites in documentaries, and his most expensive studio album Failing was a triple strike that almost brought him to his knees. But as much as it may seem like the corrupt system outlived Michael Jackson, the truth is that he had knowingly thrown himself as a wrench into the machine and let the passage of time serve as his ultimate vindication even after he's long gone. But if you want a taste of just how disgustingly exploitative the music industry can be to new artists, watch here as Joe Rogan's mind is blown learning about predatory record contracts, and subscribe to Elites Exposed for more.